What if the thing you reach for first thing in the morning wasn't a habit? What if it was a trap, carefully engineered, meticulously tested, and designed by some of the smartest minds on the planet specifically to keep you stuck? Here's something that should bother you. The average person touches their phone over 2,600 times a day. Not because they want to, not because they're bored, but because somewhere in Silicon Valley, a group of engineers, psychologists, and behavioral scientists sat down in a room and asked one question: how do we make it impossible to stop? And they found the answer. It's called infinite scroll, and it is not an accident. It is not a feature. It is a weapon built from decades of psychological research, addiction science, and the darkest corners of behavioral economics. And right now, it is running on every device in your pocket. The question isn't whether it's affecting you. It already is. The real question is, how deep does it go? Let's go back, way back, to a laboratory in the 1950s, where a scientist named B.F. Skinner was doing something that seemed almost cruel. He put a rat in a box, a simple box with a lever. Every time the rat pressed the lever, it got a food pellet. Predictable, reliable, and after a while, the rat figured it out and only pressed the lever when it was hungry. But then Skinner changed one thing. He made the reward random. The rat became obsessed. It pressed the lever over and over and over again. Not when it was hungry, constantly, compulsively, almost desperately. Because the brain, when faced with unpredictable rewards, doesn't relax. It locks in. It enters a state of heightened arousal, constantly scanning, constantly hoping, constantly chasing that next hit. Think about what happens before infinite scroll existed. You'd open a website. You'd read page 1. You'd click a button to go to page 2. That click, that tiny, almost invisible friction, was actually doing something incredibly important. It was giving your brain a moment to decide, am I done? Should I stop? It was a choice, a micro moment of agency. Now here's where it gets darker, because infinite scroll by itself isn't the whole story. It's just the vessel. What fills that vessel? What decides what you see and in what order is something far more sophisticated. The algorithm. And the algorithm doesn't care about you, not even a little. It doesn't care about your happiness, your mental health, your relationships, or your sense of reality. It cares about exactly one thing. How long can we keep your eyes on the screen? Every time you pause on a post, even for half a second, the algorithm notices. Every time you slow down, rewatch, comment, or share, it is logging data points, building a profile, learning your psychology with a precision that would make most therapists feel inadequate. And then it feeds you more of what made you pause, more of what triggered an emotional response, more of what made your heart rate spike. Here's the disturbing part. The content that keeps people watching the longest is rarely the content that makes them feel good. It's the content that makes them feel something intense. Outrage, fear, awe, shock, moral indignation. And it has discovered, through billions of data points, that negative emotions are often more intense than positive ones. So it serves you more conflict, more fear, more things that make you angry. Let's make this real for a second. Imagine you're lying in bed at 11 p.m. You pick up your phone just to check one thing, just for 5 minutes. The third one is slightly alarming. Something about the news, something about the economy, something that pricks at a fear you already had. And over the next 30 minutes, because it will be 30 minutes, not 5, it will serve you a carefully calibrated cocktail of content designed to keep that emotional tension alive. This is not an accident. This is the design. There's a term used in the tech industry that you need to know. They call it the attention economy. The idea is simple and terrifying. In a world where every platform is competing for your eyes, attention itself becomes the currency. You think you're consuming content, but the reality is far more uncomfortable. You are the product. Former president of Facebook, Sean Parker, said it out loud in 2017. He said, and I'm quoting him directly, "How do we consume as much of your time and conscious attention as possible? And that means that we need to give you a little dopamine hit every once in a while." He said the founders of Facebook knew they were creating something that exploited a vulnerability in human psychology, and they did it anyway. Let that sit with you. Now, some people hear this and say, okay, but I'm aware of it. I know what's happening. Does awareness protect me? And the answer is, not really. Not in the way you'd hope. Because here's what makes this so insidious. Knowing that something is addictive doesn't make it less addictive. People who smoke know cigarettes are killing them. People who gamble know the house always wins. Knowledge and behavior operate in different parts of the brain. The systems being exploited here: dopamine pathways, pattern recognition circuits, the brain's threat detection network. These are ancient. They evolved long before rational thought. And rational thought, no matter how sophisticated, can only do so much against 4 billion years of evolutionary hardwiring. What's more, the engineers building these systems know this. They study it. They test it obsessively. There are entire teams at these companies, often with PhDs in psychology and neuroscience, whose only job is to find the gaps in your self-control and fill them with engagement. They are fighting with the most sophisticated behavioral science ever developed. You are fighting with willpower. It's not a fair fight. But here's where the story gets even more complex, because the effects don't stop at your attention span. Researchers are starting to map out consequences that go far deeper. Studies from the last decade are finding correlations between heavy social media use, particularly use driven by infinite scroll, and significant increases in anxiety, depression, and loneliness. Especially in young people. Especially in teenagers. When you scroll endlessly through a curated highlight reel of other people's lives, your brain isn't doing what you think it's doing. You're not just passively watching. You're constantly, automatically, almost involuntarily comparing. Their vacation, your apartment, their relationship, your loneliness, their success, your stagnation. And because the content is algorithmically selected to be emotionally provocative, which often means aspirational or shocking, you are constantly measuring yourself against a version of reality that doesn't exist. The social comparison machine runs at full speed, 24 hours a day, right in your pocket. And the toll it takes is cumulative and quiet and deeply, deeply underestimated. Jonathan Haidt, one of the most respected social psychologists in America, has argued that the rise of smartphone-based social media among adolescents maps almost perfectly onto the rise of anxiety disorders, depression, and self-harm among teenage girls starting around 2012. That's the year Instagram became ubiquitous. Correlation isn't causation, but the pattern is there, and it's hard to ignore. This is a story about the unseen architecture of the modern digital world. We are now living within a system designed not for connection, but for consumption, a crisis of attention and of responsibility. So who's responsible? And what, if anything, is being done? That's where the story becomes almost philosophical, because these companies aren't run by villains. They're run by people, often brilliant, often well-intentioned, who built something that grew beyond anyone's ability to fully control or predict. The core problem lies in the mechanism itself, the continuous, unpredictable flow designed to keep you hooked. Asa Raskin, the man who invented infinite scroll, said, "Behind every screen on your phone, there are generally 1,000 engineers that have worked on this thing to try to make it maximally addicting." He didn't mean addicting in a fun way. He meant it in the clinical sense, in the slot machine sense, and he deeply regrets it. Former Google design ethicist Tristan Harris has spent years trying to sound the alarm, calling the attention economy a, quote, race to the bottom of the brainstem, a competition to see who can exploit the most primitive, most vulnerable parts of human psychology the most effectively. The world is attempting to push back against this new architecture. Some countries are starting to push back. Regulators in Europe and Australia have begun implementing restrictions. A few platforms have experimented with adding friction back, putting warnings on certain content, adding "you're all caught up" messages, or giving users screen time dashboards. But these measures are modest, almost symbolic, because the infrastructure of infinite scroll and algorithmic feeding is now so deeply embedded in the economic model of the internet that dismantling it would require something close to a revolution in regulation, in culture, or in technology itself. And revolutions don't happen quickly. So where does that leave you? Right now, watching this video, probably on the same device you use to scroll. Here's something interesting. Awareness, while imperfect, is not useless. The fact that you know the mechanism, the variable ratio reinforcement, the algorithmic manipulation, the attention economy, gives you something that most people don't have, a name for it. And there's something psychologically powerful about being able to name what's happening to you. It creates a tiny but real distance between the stimulus and the response, between the urge and the action. It won't make you immune, nothing will, but it changes the relationship. Some of the most effective strategies researchers have found aren't about willpower at all. The key is shifting from pure willpower to intelligent design. They're about design. Specifically, redesigning your environment to remove the cues that trigger the behavior before the craving even starts. Keeping your phone off your nightstand. Removing apps from your home screen. Using grayscale mode to make the visual reward less stimulating. Small friction. Deliberate friction. Reinstating those tiny moments of choice that infinite scroll took away. Because the lever is always going to be there. The pellets are always going to come. The algorithm is always going to know you better than you know yourself. But maybe, just maybe, if you understand the cage you're in, you can start to decide when to step out of it. This is a story about invisible chains, about the design choices that shape modern life and trap an entire generation. We live in a world crafted not just to connect us, but to consume our most valuable resource, our attention. The endless scroll, a river of content with no natural banks, a loop designed never to resolve. The man who built the scroll that trapped a generation said something that has stayed with me. He understood the mechanism, the precise biological lever they were pulling. This wasn't just interface design. It was applied psychology at a global scale. He said, it's as if they took behavioral cocaine and sprinkled it over the interface. Think about that, about the chemical reward loop they knowingly implemented. That subconscious drive, that muscle memory that overrides rational thought. The next time you open an app without knowing why. Time dilation. The sudden realization that minutes became hours. The internal clock is muted by the external, manufactured urgency of the screen. The next time you meant to check one thing and lost an hour. The next time you feel that vague, restless pull toward your screen, even in a quiet moment. This pull isn't accidental. It's a meticulously calculated result. That pull was designed. It was engineered. It was tested on millions of people until it worked perfectly. They exploit known human vulnerabilities. This is not a personal failure. You're not weak for feeling it. You're human. But now you know. The first step to regaining control is simply acknowledging the trap. This knowledge is power, even if it doesn't solve everything immediately. And knowing, even imperfectly, even incompletely, might just be the most rebellious thing you can do.